friends, and welcome back to another video. If you're new around here, I'm Beth. I finished my PhD last year and now I'm embarking on my academic journey as a postdoctoral researcher. I cannot believe it's been a year. Honestly, it's completely flown by. Some of it has felt like it's dragged a lot and some of it has completely just flashed before my eyes. My current postdoc is still within the same lab that I did my PhD and that first 6-month stint, but it's on something a little bit different to what I'm used to, and it's split between a couple of different groups within the same institute. To celebrate my 1-year postdoc anniversary, I thought I would answer some of your burning questions about postdoc life. There are lots of pros and cons to doing a postdoc, and there's lots of pros and cons to academia in general, all of which I can go into in another video because it really deserves a bit more attention than just answering your questions. One quick caveat before we start: this is my experience and my opinion. I'm asking your questions, and this is the experience of a woman in the UK working in cardiovascular research. It will differ at different universities, different fields, different countries, so my experience might not necessarily reflect your experience, and that's okay. But I just wanted to share in case it helps anyone. Now that's out of the way, let's get stuck in. How is a postdoc different to doing a PhD? Well, this was the most asked question, and again, I can go into an insane amount of detail with its own separate video. However, what I will say is that because I've stayed in the same lab, there is a lot of familiarity. What I will say that's different is you have more responsibility and you don't have as much kind of ownership over your project, because your PhD is kind of your baby and you can kind of like get away with things because, you know, ultimately it's going to contribute to your thesis in the end. So you can be like, oh, I'll go down this rabbit hole. I think this is interesting. This is my PhD. I'm getting something out of this. Whereas with a postdoc, it's a project written by your supervisor and it's something that they want you to research and there's specific outcomes involved. So you don't have as much ownership and there is a little bit more responsibility in terms of training students and supervising students, and also kind of making sure that you're submitting papers and also teaching involved. Not always, but that's my experience. How are you mentally finding the postdoc? Well, it's a very good question. It's been very up and down. It's been very turbulent. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. A lot of it is ending the chapter or closing the chapter of PhD. I had a really positive PhD experience, and for those of you that follow me on Instagram and have seen some of my previous videos, I've talked a lot about this sense of loss and not feeling like you have any goals after PhD, because all I wanted to do when I started applying for PhDs was I want to get my PhD, I want to do science, I want to be in research, I want to help contribute to cardiovascular research. And I think when that's over, it's weird, and it's something that came at quite a shock to me. So that time was a little bit rough. The beginning was quite intense because I started immediately after my PhD, which I do not recommend. I recommend taking a break, but I needed money, so I did not. And it was intense. And when I started the position, there was so much that was familiar, but so much that was different. And I had it in my head that, well, I've got my PhD now. I need to prove that I am actually worthy of this. And I battled a lot with that. And I still do ultimately, but it's gotten better. And I think that's because I'm better within myself, mentally, physically, just personally as well. Like personal circumstances have affected my experience during my postdoc as well. So it's definitely been up and down, but it's getting better. Is the postdoc what you expected? Yes and no. I don't really know what I expected. I thought it would kind of be an easy transition going from PhD to postdoc because I was in the same lab, but actually I found it really hard because people know you, and because you've been there for a long time, you get pulled in a lot of different directions. So people asking for help, knowing things about specific systems and how we do things and just general processes of working in the institute that I work in or working in a lab that I work in. And I feel like that was quite hard because I think if you were to move somewhere else, you're new, so you're not the expert in a particular area, so you don't necessarily get pulled in those directions. So I think the responsibility kind of amped up quite a bit, which so it should, but I think the amount of responsibility for me personally was quite a shock. How has your project progressed in the last year? Well, I won't lie, it's been a bit slow, and I found that quite a challenge. I think we often forget when we come to the end of our PhD. My last 18 months of my PhD was the most productive I've ever been, because you have a deadline to submit, and all my experiments, I was confident with the experimental techniques. I knew what I wanted to do. I had a very clear plan of what I wanted to do, and my experiments worked. I was very lucky with that. My experiments worked. I had a really good phenotype. I was able to get some really good data, and I think we forget that when we come to the end of a project, what the beginning of a project is like. And actually it can be quite slow. I've spent a lot of time setting things up. I set up a new system in our lab that hadn't been set up before, and I did that completely from scratch, and it was a nightmare. I have lots of videos of me in despair trying to figure out that system. But a year on, it's up and running. I'm able to collect and quantify data and get some really great images. It's an in vitro flow system where we're trying to mimic blood flow within a plastic system outside of the body, and it's really cool. It's a great system. It just had a lot of challenges and bottlenecks to get it working and working consistently, but we've got there, so I'm really proud of that. It just meant that took a lot of time, and I felt like I haven't really moved the project itself forward. I've just moved a technique forward, if that makes sense. And I also was trying to finish and submit my paper from my PhD, which did get rejected, but we move. We're gonna go through some of the reviewers' comments and submit again, and hopefully 2024 is the one where we get that. So in terms of project progression, it's not moved in the way that I would have hoped, but I'm trying to be kind to myself because it was the first year of a project and I'm still trying to find my feet a little bit and still kind of understand the project and what the direction is. I got a couple of questions asking about the salary. So one of them was, are you happy with the salary? And the other was, is it a livable wage? So to answer both of them, yes, happy with the salary, happy with the fact that it's a livable wage, very fortunate. I think a lot of people have this misconception that you earn a lot more money when you finish your PhD, but it's not that much. It's more than my PhD, it's more than when I did my PhD for sure, but in terms of the years and experience and qualification, it is not as much as some people think. But I'm pretty happy with it. I'm very fortunate, I'm very lucky to have a job and it pays fairly well. It could pay more. I mean, I think we could all agree a lot of jobs could pay more, but I'm just happy to have a job, and I'm happy that I live in a place that's not necessarily super expensive, so I'm quite fortunate there. A lot of people ask me, how do you decide whether you're cut out for a postdoc or not? Easiest answer to that, try one. I don't know the answers. I still don't know if I'm cut out for it. I'm just trying to give it my best and see how we feel in 2 years' time when my contract ends, and see whether it's something I would like to do again or whether I would like to do a postdoc elsewhere. Sometimes I think maybe doing a postdoc elsewhere would help me decide whether staying in academia would be for me. I'm pleased that I stayed where I did, but I think sometimes I do have that little bit of an itch to kind of work somewhere else, potentially abroad or somewhat in a different lab, just to see how things are done differently. Do you create new projects or is it just your supervisors? This is a really interesting question. So my postdoc project was written by my supervisors. They wrote the project, so they kind of are the driving force and the decision makers generally about the project and which direction to go down. That being said, I have had the opportunity to write mini research projects for myself, for PhD students and also master's students. So there are plenty of opportunity to write your own. You just need to check with your supervisor whether that is in your workload model and whether you're expected to do that or whether you have time to do that, and whether your supervisor is happy with you allocating time to do that. How do you prepare for a postdoc? Well, I don't think I did, if I'm being totally honest. Like I said, I started immediately after I finished my PhD, so I didn't really have any kind of respite before I started this project, and I wish I'd taken a bit more of a break to kind of digest the PhD experience and also get myself like mentally prepared to start another project for 3 years. In terms of general preparation, reading around the topic, speaking to your supervisors, and just trying to have conversations about that particular research area and the research project, and remember what it was like to be a first year PhD student where you're essentially a sponge and you want to absorb lots of information. That's kind of where you need to be at the beginning of a postdoc project. Do you need to publish a certain amount of papers per year? No, and thank goodness, because it's not easy. And if it was, everyone would do it. No, absolutely not. Not in my institute, not at my university. This could be totally different elsewhere, but for me, there is not a requirement. And even from the funding body, they just want to know that you have tried to do the project that you set out to do. And whether you have a measurable output, i.e. a paper, that's amazing. Or if you apply for another grant to follow up work, again, that's also amazing. But if not, at least you tried, you know what I mean? So thankfully not, because I don't think I would be having a very good track record with that. What was your motivation to stay in academia? I wanted to experience academia in all its glory, I guess. A lot of my PhD was done during COVID, so I didn't necessarily get to experience what it was like to work and do research in academia in all its glory, if that makes sense. So that was the main reason for staying. And also I stayed because I liked the people that I worked with and I liked where I lived. I liked living in Leeds. I didn't want to uproot myself or my partner. My partner has a business here. So there was a lot of other factors, and because there were opportunities in place for me to apply for a postdoc within the same group, in the same institute, I took it. So that's essentially why. I didn't have a lot of thought about it. It was just what was available at the right time and whether I wanted to experience academia more. Would you recommend doing a postdoc? Well, that's entirely up to you. That's for your own decision to make. I think a postdoc is pretty cool. There are a lot of challenges, and I can talk about the pros and cons of doing a postdoc in a separate video. However, I think you get a lot of flexibility in academia, and for me, my experience with the people that I work with and generally the institute is quite positive. It's generally positive, not always positive, because academia can be annoying. However, that being said, it's a nice way to experience academia for a short period of time. So my project is for 3 years, which is considered a long postdoc project actually, but I have a job guaranteed for 3 years, whereas no other job, unless you're a tenured professor, can guarantee you a job specifically for a set amount of time. Like, yes, you can have permanent positions in other jobs, but you could get made redundant. Your job might not exist anymore. Whereas there's funding in place for those 3 whole years. And I think that's really great. Not a lot of people can say that, especially in this economic climate. And I'm getting married next year. I have a lot of stuff that I want to achieve personally. And I think having that job security for 3 years, and I know a lot of people talk about academia in a negative way in regards to job security, but I like to look at it in a different way. What do you want to do next, and what are your longer term plans? I don't know. There's a lot of pressure in academia in terms of what the next step is. Are you going to apply for this grant? Are you going to publish this paper? What's next? It's all of this, and what's your 5-year plan? And I don't have one. And I think people might think that that's a little weird and probably not very productive, but I am passionate about what I do, and I'm passionate about research, particularly cardiovascular research, but it's not my entire life, and I will never let it be. I have other things I want to achieve in my life outside of that. So in terms of long-term plans in academia, I don't know. I won't shy away from applying for things just to give things a go. Like, I apply for jobs even now, even though I don't necessarily want to leave my current job, I will still apply for other jobs just to have interview experience, just to see what else is out there, to expand my network. And I'm very much of the opinion of like taking something that feels right for you. Like I kind of go by gut feelings, so I think that's where I'm at, and it's probably not the best answer. After a year in this position, do you feel like you made the right choice? I do. I probably wouldn't have said that 6 months ago. But a year on, like upon reflection, I think I made the right choice. I have a life here in Leeds and my job allows me to live that life here in Leeds. So I'm very grateful that I'm able to stay and that I was able to work with some great people and get involved in some really interesting projects outside of my postdoc project. So yeah, I am glad that I made that decision. It may not feel like it sometimes. I have to remind myself it was definitely the right thing for me at that time. I did not have the capacity to apply elsewhere and move. So I'm really pleased that I did stay, and I would like to think I'm going to stick out the entire postdoc. I want to see a project from start to finish. That's just who I am. And yeah, things are looking up. Things definitely looking up. Do you feel ready to start your own research group? No, I feel like I can manage a group very well. I feel like I come in a little bit like the mum manager, momager type vibe sometimes at work. And I think that is because I've been there for a while, so I do have the confidence to speak up for myself. And some may call it bossy, but I'm going to call it being assertive. So I feel like I have had a lot of exposure to what it's like to run a research group, but I don't think I have the ideas and the grant experience or the track record and all of those kind of things that you need in order to be in a position to run your own research group. I think I'm still quite junior, to be honest. Maybe, who knows in the future, it might be something that I want to do. Sometimes I think it's something that I would like to do in the future, but I don't know. I'm open-minded. How many master's students do you have to supervise, and is it mandatory? So I am a second supervisor for a PhD student, which is pretty cool. I'm really excited about their project. I'm really excited to supervise or officially be a supervisor. And I also have a master's student where I am the lead supervisor on their project. It's not mandatory, but it definitely is useful, and I think you learn a lot from it. And in terms of the master's student, I was able to write that project and dictate what the project is going to be and how we're going to move that project forward. So they're all really amazing skills to learn. How did you find your postdoc? Well, because I was already in the lab, I knew that the postdoc was going to go live on the university website and I applied for it. In some cases when you are already employed by the university, you can apply for jobs under something called redeployment. So that's where it goes out internally before it goes out externally. But I've not been employed long enough to qualify for redeployment, so I had to wait till it went out externally, and I had to fill out an application form, attach CV and cover letter, as well as do an interview with a presentation. So I did all of that, and that was with my PhD supervisor and then another supervisor on the project. That was pretty good. The interview was pretty positive. I felt a bit more relaxed because I knew my PhD supervisor, but this was the first time I'd really kind of spoken to and engaged with one of the other supervisors, so I was quite nervous for that aspect of the interview, but it went well and I got it. What were your criteria for choosing your lab, and what are your thoughts now? So my criteria was, did I find the project interesting? Is the lab good? Do I get on well with the supervisors? They were the 3 bits of criteria really, and it just so happened to be in Leeds, and it meant that I didn't have to leave and uproot my life elsewhere, and also it was in a lab that I was already familiar with, so that helped. That wasn't the main criteria though, it just so happened that it felt that way. How do you manage academic validation stress whilst still in academia? Well, this is a very good question. I'm still working on that. It's not easy, and I think something that I've really been trying to do is practice detachment of things. And it's not to say that I'm not happy or proud or excited about some of the academic validation that I get. It's just remembering like, okay, I put in hard work for this, I got this, I'm really proud of myself, this is amazing, but it doesn't it doesn't link to my self-worth. Like, I am a whole human without all of the other successes, and that is enough. So I have to remind myself that every single day. It's not easy, and I think because academia can inherently be quite a negative place because you're always critiquing things, or things get rejected, or experiments don't work, all these kind of things, it's when you get a win, it's amazing, so it does kind of reassure you and feel like, oh, I am doing a good job. But also, like, you have to remember, even if nothing worked, even if you really tried your absolute hardest and nothing worked, you're still great. Like, you're still, you know, you tried your best, you're a whole human, your job absolutely isn't everything, and people still love you. So that's kind of what I'm trying to practice myself. It's not easy, but I try. There are many more questions, and this video could go on for hours and hours. One of the key things that people asked was what are the pros and cons of doing a postdoc, and where to find postdoc positions, and what the interview process is like. So I think I'm going to reserve them for their own separate video because they need a little bit more in-depth analysis, and I have more in-depth answers that I would like to give to those. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and a huge thank you to all of the amazing people that sent in such interesting questions. I really hope my answers helped in some way, and let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!